Hello, I'm Russ Mould, AJ Bell's Investment Director, and welcome to this AJ Bell Invest Centre webinar on the subject of cryptocurrencies. It's going to be a straight down knock 'em out fight between a fan and a skeptic. I'm not going to tell you which one's which, but it probably won't take you too long to find it out. So in one corner, we've got Terry McGivern, Passive Fund Manager at AJ Bell Investments. And in the other corner, we've got Kevin Doran, Head of AJ Bell Investments. So I'm just going to fire away a few questions and let them duke it out between themselves. And in the spirit of ITV wrestling from the 1970s, I'm looking for 2 falls, 2 submissions, or a straight knockout, and we'll see how we get on after around 30 minutes. So Terry, I'm going to start off with you. And if we talk, the word cryptocurrency conjures up the concept of money. And I would view money as a unit of account, a store of value, or a trusted means of exchange. So in your opinion, would cryptocurrencies tick any or all of those boxes?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective is, when you hear the word cryptocurrencies, and I think, a lot of people sort of broad brush the entire space into that bucket. I think they do fulfill some of them functions. I think it's difficult in the case of the most well-known one, for instance, Bitcoin, which is what everyone sort of conflates the entire space with. I think it's difficult to say that that fulfills all of them. When I think of crypto, I sort of think of it more along the lines of crypto assets, because I do think that the currency nomenclature sort of does give it a little bit of a distraction. I think if you look at Bitcoin when it was originally proposed or developed by the pseudonymous Satoshi, I think his idea was that it was going to be a peer-to-peer currency, and the idea was frictionless transfers across borders, and people can basically due to the fact that it's got a programmed sort of limit of how many will be out there, it will basically hold its value. It can be used as a unit of account, and it can be transferred, as I say, frictionless. I think as the space has developed and as we understand a little bit more about Bitcoin and the network and the way that it works, I think it's going to struggle to fulfill some of them roles that were originally proposed. And I think the fact is that with large parts of people who looked at crypto asset class, they basically see Bitcoin or know about Bitcoin and not many of the others. I think it can lead to people being sort of confused that all crypto assets are deemed currencies and should be thought of as currencies, in the same way that currencies, as we know, with fiat money.
Right, we'll come back to that topic later because that's a very good point. Kev, unit of account, store of value, trusted means of exchange?
1, 2 out of 3. Store of value. I don't think anything which has dropped, and let's just look at where we are now, anything that's dropped by more than 50% in about 6 weeks, I don't think that can be considered a store of value. So cryptocurrency, and maybe echo some of the stuff that Terry's talked about there. Cryptocurrency, no. I think lots of people go straight to Bitcoin when they go onto the subject. If we look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin is a crypto commodity. It's basically the digital version of gold. But I don't want to kind of jump all over Terry's stuff there. So I will happily concede some points, such as it's a contract, but then again, so is regular money. I'd also concede that gold is probably the best analogy of Bitcoin, and let's stick with Bitcoin for the time being. Gold is the perfect analogy of it, and gold has been held in many a portfolio, particularly since the 1970s, but across many portfolios before then. So I'm not going to jump all over cryptocurrencies, crypto commodities, as I would see them. There's a role for them, but to answer your question directly, store of value, absolutely not.
And in terms of the cases that people put forward for, I guess specifically Bitcoin, but cryptos more widely, you have people arguing that they are the future of money, that they are, again, a useful means of exchange, that there are libertarian reasons for running them because big brother government can't track you, or indeed in certain oppressive regimes, it's the only way in which you can go about your business without necessarily being spied upon. So there do seem to be there legitimate reasons for them. Equally, some would say, well, they have a value because there's a network there, and if people think they have value, then QED, I suppose, a little bit like gold, though some might argue that gets you into sort of Dutch tulip bulb territory as well at the same time, thinking that something has a value, then it does. Terry, future of money, or something that's just something, or is it, again, you've suggested perhaps something else there's more to it with the wider blockchain phenomenon and things like smart contracts, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the way that I sort of think of it, and I think to take Kev's analogy to digital gold, I think, in the Bitcoin space, I think he's right, in terms of the role that will play. But I think if you look at the wider space and some of the newer protocols, some of the newer tokens that are coming out, and the way that the sort of infrastructure and the rails that the current financial system runs on, with banks with very centralized sort of control over how money is issued, who can issue money, who can grant credit, and things like that. I think if in the West, we're in a privileged position pretty much compared to a large part of the globe in terms of our access to financial services and basically being able to trust the authorities that they're not going to almost debauch the currency to any real, although that's starting to get questioned a little bit more now. But I think in other regimes, as you mentioned, totalitarian regimes or places where people can't really trust the government and the way that the financial system is managed, I think they probably do need alternative solutions. And I think there are new protocols out there, as I say, and new tokens that are coming out that basically take the best of a cryptographically sort of secured asset and almost do give it the sort of transaction throughput and the capability for it to operate as a currency. I think you need to move past the Bitcoin idea for playing that role, because as I say, I just don't think it's necessarily got the sort of energy efficiency and the transaction throughput to be able to fulfill them roles. And I can see what Kev was saying, 2 out of 3. But I think there are some now that are coming out which do exist, which really do leverage blockchain technology. Blockchain's not a new technology, it's been around a long time, but I think it's only with the arrival of Bitcoin that we really merged it with a way to sort of leverage it and use it. And I think now with the newer ones that are coming out, they're even better again. And just to sort of cite a name, for instance, Solana is a blockchain that comes out and has the capability to do 65,000 transactions per second, which is 2.5 times Visa's throughput. And whilst Bitcoin, everyone compares Bitcoin to Visa and sort of says that it'll never be able to fulfill the function of money, something that's doing 2.5 times Visa's throughput right now, and has still got the benefit of basically growing as computing power improves. That will also grow as well, in line with probably a Moore's law sort of rule. I think that there are blockchain implementations and there are products out there and protocols out there now that will enable crypto assets to basically start to function like money. What will be interesting is to see where the lines are drawn in terms of which ones central banks will allow and which functions will they basically ring fence for themselves. And I think that's where the real interest and battlegrounds will probably come to the fore.
Just before we come back to topics like blockchain and central bank digital currencies, Terry, for those who are new to the area, can you just quickly explain how blockchain and crypto are related and the two shouldn't be conflated, that there are key separate issues there?
Well, at a simple level, all a blockchain is doing is basically using a distributed ledger. So if you think of, to really simplify it as an analogy, a ledger book, so a central sort of authority maintains a database of transactions. That's how a lot of things operate right now. A blockchain distributed ledger basically means everyone has a copy of this ledger, which has recorded transactions, and there's a consensus mechanism that says we all agree that this is the true one copy. And that distributed sort of no one with central control, and there's various different ways that applications that you can put on top of that. There's proof of work, which is what Bitcoin uses, which is basically miners will compete to basically complete math problems to decide which one is the true book of record. There's proof of stake, which is a more a newer, more novel way of doing it, a lot more energy efficient, where basically people will in effect put up an amount of a bond almost to basically to have the right to sort of try and generate rewards from basically signing the transactions. But this idea of blockchain being distributed, it is basically a open source, there's no one trusted authority as the single book of record, which opens up, the idea of borderless finance, and, basically central banks not being able to almost control, sort of who can and who can't access financial applications in a particular country. That technology is basically what gives that, that ability to be able to push across boundaries for financial products and financial innovation. And where the sort of the crypto asset element comes in is that in a lot of these cases, the crypto token is what is used to either secure the network or provide rewards for basically securing the network. So blockchain and crypto assets are, related, but they are actually separate as well. Blockchain can exist without, a cryptographically signed asset, I suppose. But when they two got put together, it becomes a very, very powerful, technology to be able to basically develop new financial applications, as I say, open borders up and allow people who don't have banking access or financial application access to have that, and a way to move money around without, in a trustless fashion, without being reliant on middlemen or basically people to approve and say that you can or cannot, what you can or cannot do effectively with your own assets and money.
Okay, you mentioned earlier on the store of value, that was where you felt Bitcoin fell down. I mean, that is one cryptocurrency of many. From again, an advisor and a client point of view, can cryptos or tokens or non-fungible tokens be seen as investable assets, or are they just punt vehicles where hot money seems to be chasing the latest tweet on Elon Musk's account?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, the store of value one with Bitcoin is obviously interesting. It's a new asset class, and whilst it's still growing and undergoing adoption, you're going to get people who are drawn to the speculative fever. You're going to get people who understand the the sort of limited supply and maybe think that if enough people believe in that, it will retain value. And I do think as it approaches that sort of endpoint, you will probably start to see more stability in the price. But I take the point in what Kev said, it's a very volatile store of value at the moment. And I think that is, that's the case with any new asset class, I think, as it undergoes adoption. I do think, though, once you get past that and you start to familiarize yourself with some of the other applications and some of the other tokens, and you start to think, is the crypto asset space and blockchain technology almost a new, the dawn of a new era? You have Web3, where if we think of things like Money One as being basically central banks and gold back in the day, a couple of 100 years ago, of issuing money, and the way that we transact is quite basic. I guess you could call level 2 as then we get applications, which allow basically people to connect via the web and distribute money and basically invest your money via an application front end on the web. I think what we're talking about now with this newer technology, with crypto assets and blockchain, is almost the next generation, which is like Web3, I suppose I would call it. And it's that sort of confluence of where you're no longer just using, accessing the internet and basically using a front end app. You're able to almost invest in the actual infrastructure underpinning it, the protocols. If you think back to the internet, with things like TCP, IP, HTTP, which people maybe know the acronyms of, but don't really understand how they work. When you go on the internet, you access a website and it just works. The website appears, you put an address in. There's a whole host of things that are happening under the surface there, which people maybe don't appreciate. And with the dawn of the internet, you weren't able really to monetize that sort of infrastructure. With what's happening now with blockchain and with the dawn of crypto, crypto asset class, in a lot of these instances, you are going to be able to share in the revenue and the fees that are associated with throughput on them protocols. And whilst a lot of people won't see them working under the surface, they are working under the surface. And with the native token that's linked to that protocol, you are possibly able to start to generate, revenues, fees. And that, in my mind, then makes these sort of crypto assets not that dissimilar from real world shareholdings, in terms of if there is a mechanism for a problem to be solved by a protocol, and a way for that to monetize that problem solving capability, then people who own that native asset maybe can start to ascribe a value to it. Almost, there is a utility, and I think that's the difference with the newer products and the newer crypto assets that are coming out versus something like a Bitcoin, which is very much, as Kev said, a digital gold, and it's hard to ascribe a real utility to it at present. I do think, you know, with some of the newer ones that are coming out, you will start to be able to say that there is a utility to these products, and there is a way to value them.
I mean, at the moment, Kevin, I mean, how would you, or how could you go about valuing Bitcoin or a crypto? And is there any argument for cryptos to be part of an asset allocation process within a balanced portfolio? I know that some of the big US investment banks and some fund management houses have started to dip their toe in and give a percentage allocation there. Or is it just a Ponzi scheme waiting to go terribly wrong?
Well, and this, I want to kind of back Terry up on some of there's absolutely some great use cases for cryptocurrencies, crypto commodities. The most pertinent one being frictionless transfer of cash, particularly across borders. You take Western Union as a good example. They're the market leader in this friction transfer of cash. Last year they did $5 billion of revenues and $1 billion of profit. That's $1 billion of profit that they do not deserve, and that ought to be shared across society. You come to valuation though, and this is the key, and this is why perhaps I'm on the less positive side in terms of cryptocurrencies. There's no cash flow from this whatsoever. So, and you could legitimately argue, you know, rare books, you know, cars, fine art, wine, all of those things also generate no cash flows, and so they're hard to value, but they do have some value. For any commodity whatsoever, throughout time, the fair value of that commodity is marginal cost of production. Now, when we come to, let's use Bitcoin because that's the one that everyone knows. When you come to Bitcoin, the marginal cost of a single Bitcoin being created through the mining process is about $3,000. Now, it varies depending on where you are in the world, depending on kind of, because the biggest input cost is electricity. But it comes out to about $3,000 across the globe, the marginal cost of producing a Bitcoin. So I'm sat here right now, and you know, if we look, I don't know, it's been 20 minutes, or it could be anywhere, but last time I looked, it was $35,000. That's 11 times the marginal cost of production. And so that just absolutely screams to me bubble. Now, you mentioned before, Russ, you know, kind of, is this a tulip mania? I don't necessarily think that that's the right bubble to draw the analogies. And I want to go back to Terry's, you know, Web 1, 2, 3, or Money 1, 2, 3. I'd also maybe insert a Money 1.5, which was the Mississippi bubble. Now, the Mississippi bubble, you know, John Laws basically created what would be modern day central bank theory. You know, have a centralized bank who have the seniority to create money at will. John Laws paid off the French debt from the Spanish War of Succession using that policy, but he also created the Mississippi bubble in the process. Now that went up 20 times and then fell 19 times, and that's probably what I would predict from all of the current first wave cryptocurrencies. I think ultimately, whether you can use these things in the real world, that will be determined by how governments view these cryptocurrencies. And the governments, there's no way in the world that they're going to give up seigniorage. Seigniorage is one of a country's greatest assets. They're not just going to cast that into cyberspace when they can regulate the interface between cyberspace and the real world. And I think that's why, not to jump ahead kind of to the conclusion, I think that's why you'll see more and more government-backed or central bank-backed cryptocurrencies going forward. And that's probably the future of money. But the Bitcoins and the Ethers and the Doge and all the other bits and pieces that are flying around at the moment, that feels very much like Mississippi bubble territory. Yes, the technology will persist into the future, but the current wave of what's built on that technology is absolutely in bubble territory and is destined to fall.
So Terry, I mean, Bitcoin, as you said, is the best known one, but there's Dogecoin, Ethereum, Tether, Ripple. If you go to coinmarket.com, there's now a list of around 5,000 cryptocurrencies on there. The old argument in favor of Bitcoin was, as you said, there's 21 million units possible, and that's it. Finite supply with potentially an infinite supply of central bank cash chasing them. That was one of the bull arguments, but I guess that's slightly shot down by the proliferation of them. Are there major differences between these different cryptocurrencies? Is that something that advisors should be spending time on? Or is it simply not worth their bother? I've got just on my bookshelf back here a Lewis £1 note that's acceptable in most shops of the Sussex County town of Lewis, for example, but nowhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you're asking me the question, do I think all of them 5,000 coins that are out there will survive? No. In most instances, I'm with Kev, they'll have almost zero value. You know, and I think it is very much a given that the space is unregulated at the moment, and it is almost at the very cutting edge. You know, it is very much a caveat emptor, buyer beware market. And I think, you know, if you are someone who is going to be dipping the toe in the market, you really do need to educate yourself. You know, it's a big scary world out there, and without, you know, a regulatory hand, and without someone basically, you know, sort of doing that work for you, the onus is on the individual, and I think that is really important for people to understand. I think the level of speculative fervor that we've seen in a lot of these coins, you know, I think is driven, as you mentioned, by a whole heap of liquidity looking for a home, and people basically, you know, trying to make a return out of any means possible, because, you know, we are where we are with central bank functions. But, you know, if the idea that some of the larger, more established coins, you know, your Bitcoin going to zero, I find that a difficult concept to grapple with at the moment. I think, you know, there's been so much. I think it's moved beyond that point. I think of basically it's not going to make it. It's faced so many challenges along the way. Not least, you know, the volatility and the big drops and things, but every single challenge that gets conquered by these products strengthens the case for them, you know, the resilience and them continuing to exist. And whilst I don't think Bitcoin is necessarily going to remain the market cap leader, or is even the best, you know, crypto asset that's out there, I think it will have its place. Certainly once, you know, amongst people who believe that something of limited value, if enough people and the network believe that it has value, and enough people are willing to basically make use of it as a store of value, it'll have its place. I think what's interesting is, you know, you mentioned Ethereum. That's it's a very different product. You know, it basically is a product that basically looked at the limitations of Bitcoin and basically said, is there a way that we can use smart contracts to basically remove middlemen and really sort of drive down the cost and the frictions, like, you know, experienced in a whole host of not even just financial markets, but also, you know, a number of markets. And I think that capability means, I think it will stick around and it will have value, and regardless of what central banks do. I think they see the technology and they see blockchain and they see the benefits of digital currencies, as Kev said. And I do think you'll see, well, we are seeing central banks issuing their own digital currencies. And I take Kev's point that they will guard the on-ramps and off-ramps into the fiat world as a way to basically extract their pound of flesh from people who have made money in cryptocurrencies. But I don't necessarily think that means they will no longer exist. You know, in the same way that special drawing rights are used between countries now, that the average Joe Blogs has nothing to do with. You know, central banks will have a digital currency for their needs and their uses, and I think other, you know, third-party independent central bank digital crypto assets will exist, you know, for different use cases. I'm not really of the opinion or the agreement that the fact that there are a lot detracts from the Bitcoin angle, in terms of, you know, the 21 million total supply, because the way that I sort of look at it on an analogy basis is anyone can go and create an eBay, right? You know, it's a free market. You can go and create your version of eBay. But if no one coalesces around your version of eBay as a network, as a marketplace, a place to sell and a place for buyers and sellers to meet, it has no value. That does not detract from eBay's position as a market leader, or as a product that people have decided they're willing to agree with. So I'm not necessarily of the opinion that just because lots of coins are being created, that detracts from Bitcoin. All of the various forkings of Bitcoin, which means, you know, it's an open source code and people can take that code and make their own version of it. None of them have managed to acquire the value that Bitcoin has. So I do see that as similar to, you know, in a free open capitalist market, you can go and create a business that's a carbon copy of Amazon, but if people want to still use Amazon and don't use you, you have no value, you know, as a business. So I don't necessarily think that the proliferation of these tokens and these products means that, you know, the entire space has no value. It just means that people will ascribe value to the ones. There will be winners, there will be losers, like in any sort of capitalist endeavor, I suppose. And you know, I think some of the larger blue chip crypto assets will stick around regardless of central bank digital currencies, and we will start to see, I think, you know, winners and losers start to shake out. But I do agree with Kev that, you know, there's a lot out there that probably will go to zero. And if my only sort of guidance that I could possibly say is definitely do your research and make sure you understand the application, you understand how it is theoretically going to derive value, and what is the utility, rather than just basically buying it because everyone else is buying them and they're going up. You know, speculative mania is something to be worried about, really.
And so just quickly, one question on one knock that's held against cryptos is, in theory, the blockchain is transparent, it's visible, there's the ledger. So how come sometimes to a degree it's seen as a bit of a playground for organised crime and fraud? You've had AfriCrypt, Mt. Gox, the Bulgarian crypto queen. Things just seem to have kind of disappeared, which isn't really the point of the argument, is it? So I guess that's one thing that advisors probably would be intrigued, is that how can that happen, and to what degree do the cryptocurrency users need to be wary of that sort of possibility, that sort of danger?
Yeah, I think they absolutely need to be wary about that danger. As I mentioned, you know, I actually think regulation will be good for crypto assets. You know, I think it will basically clear the air and allow people a bit more, you know, sort of faith that things are custodied properly, and they're not basically just going to see all of their, you know, their value stolen. Obviously, criminals will always try to make use of any way to hide ill-gotten gains and also move it in a, you know, safe, easy manner. If we were talking about the amount of crime that's being basically funneled into US dollars, for instance, I think, you know, it would be on an inordinate level. You know, and even with full KYC and compliance and money laundering regulations, you know, we still see headlines out there that South American drug cartels are able to launder vast quantities of money through financial systems. So, and that was all done in US dollars. So, you know, I don't think stamping out Bitcoin or stamping out crypto assets means you're going to stamp out crime. That's always going to exist, and they'll always find a way to move money. Cryptocurrencies have been obviously abused by criminal gangs for that reason, because of the portability and the borderless sort of the easy way. On a hard drive, you can carry vast sums of money across a border, which obviously makes their life a lot easier. But you know, the nefarious use case is if in my mind is you know, it is what it is. It's one of them things that you're not. I don't think it should be a turn off for the entire space, because the real world use cases and the problems it's trying to solve, I think, are bigger than, you know, criminals basically co-opting it for their own uses, which happens with fiat money. And so it's one of them things. It's an unfortunate sort of side effect of the basically the borderless, you know, frictionless way that money can move, and the fact that at the moment the regulators are still catching up with a nascent industry. But I do think regulatory reform and, you know, some sort of guidance and what can and what can't be done around crypto will actually be helpful for the asset class, because it will allow people who are maybe a little bit more sort of reticent or nervous, or, you know, businesses who can't quite really at the moment say that they're willing to dedicate resource to it because the regulatory space is so uncertain. I think some clarity on that will mean that we'll see a lot more penetration of crypto assets into the mainstream once that comes.
Okay, we are starting to see more regulatory pushback. We've seen it from the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK this week, the SEC, BaFin in Germany, the FSA in Japan have all started to push back. You've had the Americans talking about taxing them, the Indians talking about fining you for using them, the Chinese cracking down on mining. So there is some degree of pushback from the authorities. Is that because of a war on crime and fraud, or is it because of your point about them not wanting to lose control of a money supply? It was Meyer Amschel Rothschild who said, you know, give me the ability to create and control the supply of money, and I care not who makes a country's laws. So to what degree do you see central banks and governments taking a more active role? Terry thinks it may be positive. Do you think it could be negative? And what do you expect from central bank digital currencies going down the road?
Yeah, so tax avoidance and funding of crime, or the defunding of crime, are probably handy excuses for governments to regulate the space between cyberspace and the real world. The real big thing on the table here is countries have access to scenery. So if you've got a central bank and you're printing your own currency, you know, the physical cost of creating that currency is absolutely negligible compared to the value that society puts upon that currency. And that scenery, you could argue the fact that we've had essentially the dollar as the only global currency since the Second World War, effectively. So getting on for 80 odd years, that is in large part the reason why the US is the largest, most wonderful, in inverted commas, economy that there is. Certainly, it's a big part of why it's the biggest economy on the planet, and that's why I think governments would be so reticent to hand over seigniorage to cyberspace. But on top of that, to come on to your point, Russ, I think the next wave of digital currency, I won't call them cryptocurrencies. First of all, let's address the store of value problem. And so you need to create some sort of semblance, and back to Terry's point of regulation and government backing are probably the two things that come together to help solve the store of value problem. So then you can have stable currencies, and stable currencies exist at the moment. They would be backed by fiat currency. So the stable currencies do exist. And this is the real incentive, and again, another reason why I think the existing family of cryptocurrencies will ultimately fail, is because now put yourself in the position of being a central bank, which of course all central banks are owned by governments. You've got a way to almost disintermediate the retail banking network and be able to monitor every single financial transaction that takes place within your economy. And the access of that level of data allows you to make economic decisions, so fiscal or monetary policy decisions. It allows you to make those decisions with almost near perfect information. And so not only have you got the seigniorage kind of motive for why central banks and central governments will want to be in control of this space, you've now got an additional incentive of access to real-time financial information in your economy in a way that kind of gives you complete control. And this is maybe where the libertarians would jump back on, and rightly so. But you've now given governments an additional motivation for making sure that the current batch doesn't work, and the stable currencies, which are central bank government backed, they are, I would argue, the future of money. And the reason they're the future of money is because you're going into battle with people who've got nuclear missiles, literally in a number of cases, but metaphorically in the sense of they are the people who write the rules of society. And that's why I think, like I say, not to kind of label the point, that's why I think your current batch of cryptocurrencies are dead, but your next batch, which you are stable, government backed, that's the future of money.
But Terry, does not government backing and regulation do away with all of the reasons why people were so excited about cryptocurrencies in the first place?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on what, as Kev said, what level governments and regulatory authorities want to go to. If you have a government issued digital currency, and I can see exactly what Kev's saying, in terms of it is a government's wet dream almost, you know, to have that, as he said, that perfect vision of basically all of the transactions that are occurring in our economy. And let's not beat around the bush, also to have the lever to push interest rates as negative as they want at any point. But I think the fact that you know, power would exist means that people will always try to find solutions, you know, and ways to exist almost self-sovereign off that, you know, which means non-custodial, you know, people wanting to, if we think of why Bitcoin came about, it was as a result of 2008 and the response from authorities in terms of printing money. So I think, you know, you will see if that is how sort of strong governments want to crack down, eradicate all crypto asset classes, basically just so that they can, you know, have their own one basically as the central one and the one that everyone has to use, and everything else is illegal. I still think you're probably not going to get rid of it. The entire way that it exists in a decentralized, distributed manner, and the level of coordination I think you would need across, you know, global authorities to be able to do that, I think is difficult, especially in the current sort of climate of more nationalist governments and basically the whole fracturing of almost the current of the status quo as has been the case. Once you start to really try and stamp that out, I think people or you know, the amount of brain power that's being applied to these applications, I think, will be redirected to try and to circumvent that in the same manner that Bitcoin was basically created. In terms of, you know, do I think regulation is necessarily a bad thing for it? I think it isn't. As long as it, as I say, I think it depends on whether governments want to go the whole hog and completely stamp it out, or whether they basically believe that it can coexist. And, you know, I don't necessarily think they can't coexist. And I think if the regulatory push is more around ensuring that, you know, companies and businesses who do custody are able to do it, and they understand the rules and they understand, you know, what they're allowed to offer to retail audience and things like that, I think it will allow more penetration. But as I say, I think it matters the level of regulation and the level of government sort of control that they want. A more light touch, more sort of let's just agree to get on with the asset class in the same way that we do with stock, shares, bonds, you know, all the other ways that we, you know, asset classes and investment classes that we have out there. I think some regulation means that will help adoption and penetration. But if it is a very much government see it as a major threat and want to completely close every single manner and way that anyone can use a crypto asset, so that they can ram their own central bank digital currency, well, I think that for me means that a new battleground or a new front will be opened on which was started with Bitcoin. And I think, you know, the way that the technology exists will make it difficult really to completely close down and stamp out and stop any crypto asset class from basically existing.
Kev, even as a bit of a skeptic, shall we say, would you argue or accept that the equivalent of Executive Order 6102 that outlawed speculation and ownership of gold in the States in the 30s, that's just not going to be possible, even if they wanted to go down that path this time around?
Yeah, I'd readily accept that governments can't regulate cyberspace, but they can basically patrol the perimeter. And in order for your money to be of any value to you in the real world, you need to have that frictionless transfer between cyberspace and the real world. And whilst the governments are patrolling that perimeter, I think, and like I said, with good reason, in terms of their own incentives, I think that's ultimately what will crush this wave of cryptocurrencies.
So we're coming up to 45 minutes, which for a wrestling match is a pretty long time, all things considered. So one final question, if I may. Terry, as somebody who's clearly an optimist and a believer, what are the next steps that you would be looking for? You've hinted at a few already during our conversation in terms of future developments. What are the next steps that you'd be wanting to see, hoping to see, expecting to see in the crypto space in the coming weeks, months, and years?
Yeah, I mean, from my angle, I just want to see a little bit more of an enlightened regulatory response, really. I think at the moment it's very sort of disjointed. You know, some jurisdictions are positive on cryptocurrency and willing to basically see the benefits and the possible applications of it. Some are completely of the other end of the scale, some sort of like the FCA, where basically they see only the threats. And you're starting to get this really fractured, you know, landscape from a regulatory capacity, where, you know, you're getting almost regulatory arbitrage, you're getting regulatory sort of competition. And I don't think that's necessarily good. I'd much like to, in the UK in particular, see a more enlightened regulatory stance, which I think, as I say, will allow more people to, you know, have the confidence and the comfort to basically enter the space and dip their toe in and really see it reach critical mass, which may deter governments from really trying to be too authoritarian and close it down, because there is an element to me that does worry about how far governments could go with their own digital currencies. But I think that's a big thing. You know, you start to see, you know, in the SEC have said no to a Bitcoin ETF or a cryptocurrency ETF on a number of occasions, but I think something along them lines, you know, would start to basically give people the confidence to be able to invest in it and know that it's being custodied properly without having to really do the, you know, the really steep learning curve of basically almost self-custody. So I'm hopeful, you know, that you will start to see some regulatory, you know, alignment, and I hope it's a more light touch as opposed to really draconian, because as I say, I do worry if we gave governments, you know, all of the power of a central bank digital currency, and we can see what they've done so far with interest rates, and I don't think they've really covered themselves in glory in terms of central bank performance over the last 10-15 years. So, you know, I do hope it's a lighter regulatory touch, and we do see a little bit more penetration of the asset class. What I will say is, in the meantime, I think people really do need to do their education. You know, self-educate on the asset class. Don't chase returns. Don't basically, you know, try to run with the herd just because everyone else is doing it. I think that's a really dangerous thing to do. You really do need to understand what it is, why you think this product has value, and then I think it is a world that if you do start to do that education, it really does open up a lot of doors and a lot of, you know, rabbit holes to run down, and it's a really interesting intellectual space. So, you know, I hope that more people do sort of take that on and you know, have a read round, have a look at what's going on in the space, and see some of the applications, which I think are, you know, really novel and really going to be useful for society in the future. And I just hope, as I say, that regulators and governments don't crush that spirit of entrepreneurial spirit and you know, the spirit of creation of trying to make life easier for everyone in their pursuit of basically, you know, total control. So yeah, I'm hopeful, but
and Kev, what would perhaps play to your thesis that a lot of the current generation, at least, of cryptocurrencies are potentially in for a bit of a bumpy time, shall we say, over the coming weeks and months?
You've already seen it, Russ, so it's not even something that you have to see. In the absence of any kind of valuation technique, other than, like I say, your marginal cost of production, in which case Bitcoin is, you know, 10, 11 times overvalued, you've already seen the end of Bitcoin. So twice in the past couple of weeks, it's traded below 30,000. Pretty much anyone who's trying to put a sensible valuation on Bitcoin is using a chart. And if Bitcoin trades consistently below 30,000 for a couple of days, it'll be at 20,000 within a week, because there's a massive head and shoulders formation there. It'll be down to 20,000, then everyone will throw the towel in. Suddenly it's 10,000 before you know it's single digit thousands, and it's over, never to recover again. You can't have $1 trillion asset fall into less than $100 billion and it recovers. I think the only company that's done anything remotely close to that would be Apple, and this ain't Apple.
On that note, I'll leave it to our good viewers to decide who's got who in a headlock as the final point of the fight there. But thank you very much for your attention. And just to prove that it is real, here it is. Here's the Lewis £1 note. Look, Thomas Paine on it. And it even says, "We have it in our power to change the world anew." There we go. So there we go. That's Terry. That's brought a smile to Terry's face at the end there, to the release. So advisors and clients, thank you very much for your time. Keep well, and hopefully we'll see you all again very soon maybe even in the flesh, you never know.
Cheers, Russ.